Hello and welcome back to another update where I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. It is your host Weeb Union, and in this one the Russians have managed to capture an additional 50 plus square kilometers in the Kursk region, capturing more than 180 square kilometers this month, the majority of which were taken the past 48 hours by the Russian forces. The Ukrainians managed to make some more advances within Shevchenko, fighting over the town south of Pokrovsk. Starting out in the Kursk region, we see that the Russians have managed to advance in several areas of the front line here in the Kursk region. They've managed to capture Malaya, Loknya, as well as Loknya, as well as the area around them, surrounding them, to advance towards Yushny, where the culmination of the Ukrainian forces withdrawing from Malaya, Loknya, and the surrounding areas were heading towards Kasachia, Loknya, and there is still the pocket here east of Yushny where the Ukrainians are in the midst of a withdrawal from as well. The Russians are here moving from several directions, both from the eastern direction to capture Sessilevka and the remaining parts of Kobetkin. The Russians also managed to advance from the western direction through Loknya towards the fortified positions here west of Yushny, and from the Malaya-Loknya direction along the railways towards connecting with the Russian forces within Sessilevka. The Russian forces also managed to advance towards Mirny through the eastern parts of Sutsha. The Russians are here moving along the railways to connect with their forces to the east of Sutsha by capturing the eastern parts of the town. The Russians also here looking to flank Mirny, where the Ukrainians are also withdrawing from, as well as the Sutsha airport, as well as Bondarivka and Agronom towards the western parts of Sutsha. And at the same time, the Russians also managed to advance to the south of Sutsha, where they've managed to capture parts of Makhnovka, the fortified position east of the town, and north of Cherkasskaya, Konopelka. The Russians are here looking to gain full control over the eastern bank of the Sutsha river line that goes through the central parts of the town. And as we can see, the entire eastern part from Samuste in the west to Agronom in the east is now under threat of encirclement by the Russian forces. The Russians are here moving in three separate directions. They're attacking the eastern parts directly to keep the Ukrainian forces in place and to damage them as much as possible during their withdrawal. And at the same time, they're also moving alongside the river line itself to capture the eastern bank of it and cut off the remaining forces during their withdrawal. The Russians are here looking to advance and capture everything east of the river line to create a front line alongside the river line itself. This will allow the Russians to gain control of the remaining towns alongside the eastern bank and cut off the remaining soldiers during their withdrawal. Once the front line is aligned with the river line and the Russians have ended these pockets that have been created east of the river line, they'll start offensive operations directly from Svetlikovo towards the western parts of Sutsha, as well as operations from the rear, both from the southeastern and southwestern flanks. And at the same time, they'll attempt crossing several areas across the river line, similar to when the Ukrainians first entered the Kursk region. There are a lot of reasons why the Russians have succeeded this much with the offensive operation to recapture the Kursk region with this recent advance. One of the reasons is written out in this CNN article, where they quote a critical logistics situation. Russian forces are attacking Sutsha from several directions, according to Yuri Kutinuk, a Russian military blogger. So they're quoting a Russian military blogger. Any movement of the enemy in this area are detected by our drones, and the enemy's personnel and equipment are being struck. So we're seeing that this is CNN in this case, where they need to search for information and the Ukrainians are unwilling to give it. They have to quote the Russian military bloggers, and they see the reality of the situation, and that is that the Russians have been striking the sole supply line of the Ukrainian forces into the Sutsha direction for many weeks now. The Russians, with their advances in the western flanks and the eastern flanks of this supply line, have come within close proximity to this supply road. And with this, there are constant strikes by FPV drones and artillery on these positions. There are even some long-range strikes by tanks and other long-range firing systems, such as the ATGM, where they are striking anything that goes in and out of the Kursk region for the Ukrainians. And this is very critical for the logistics of the Ukrainians. Without these supplies, it has been difficult for the Ukrainians to properly defend against the Russian offensive. At the same time, the Russians have also struck the gathering of troops of the Ukrainian forces within Sucha. This prevented any meaningful counterattacks. At the same time, the communications were completely cut off between the Ukrainian forces within the Kursk region and outside of the Kursk region, as well as within the Kursk region itself between each other. It was very limited how much the Ukrainians could communicate, and the information was also very conflicting. The majority of the Ukrainian forces so far have attempted to withdraw from some of these frontline positions, such as Loknya, Malaya, Loknya, as well as other areas like Martinovka. However, the Russian advances have been so fast that it prevented several groupings of Ukrainian forces from withdrawing and attacked them during their withdrawal. This has caused a lot of casualties among the Ukrainian forces, and the ones that were left behind were not able to make a proper stand. An example is Malaya Loknya. Malaya Loknya is a town that the Ukrainians spent several days during the height of their offensive to take control of. Especially the women's penal colony here on the eastern parts is a women's prison within Malaya Loknya, and it's very well fortified, similar to the prison area in the city of Toretsk. The Russians were fighting over every single building within Malaya Loknya. Now that the Russians counterattacked in the direction of Malaya Loknya, with Ukrainian soldiers abandoning their positions and withdrawing from the town, and others having to be left behind to cover for the retreat, the Russian forces were able to capture it within just 24 hours. Once they entered it, they had managed to capture it. And with this, the Russians have already waved the flag over Malaya Loknya, capturing the town. And with the withdrawal of the Ukrainian forces from the forest patch areas around the town and the town itself, the entire area is now under Russian control. This also led to the Russians, with their capture of the fortified positions here east of Nikolsky and advance through the railway area, as well as the capture of Lebedivka over the past few weeks. The Russians were able to cut off the supply lines towards Loknya, limiting the supply going into the town. And during the withdrawal of the Ukrainian forces from the area, the Russians launched an offensive to gain control of it, and fighting is now taking place over the fortified positions to the east of it. In the direction of Sucha itself, the Russians, with their pipeline, managed to enter the eastern parts of Sucha with the quick capture of Martinovka during the chaos of the Ukrainian armed forces, bypassing the town, following which they cut off the supplies and managed to capture it fairly quickly. The Russians took full advantage of this to advance along the railways to cut off the supplies to the Ukrainian forces here in the Cherkaskoye-Porishnoye direction, and this has led to a complete cut off of the supplies for the Ukrainian forces in the area, as well as cutting off the withdrawal of the Ukrainian forces in the area, encircling the forces in the area, with the only supply line being from Yushny towards Bohdanovka, which is within such close proximity to Russian forces both on the western and eastern flanks that it is impossible for the Ukrainian forces to supply their forces or to withdraw without a fight. It is likely that everything east of the river line here within Sucha direction will be lost by the Ukrainians within the next 24 to 48 hours, and this will lead to the Russian entering the final stage of the capture of the remaining parts of the Kursk region, the recapture of it from the Ukrainian Kursk incursion that had started in August of 2024, and that is to capture the western parts of the river line all the way to the border area. And as we can see, the majority of the settlements are located on the eastern bank of the river line. We see that there are numerous towns and villages on the eastern bank of the river line, but only a few on the western bank. The majority of the positions of the Ukrainians on the western bank of the river line are simply fortified positions, but the Russians have built these pointing in the direction of the Ukrainians, which means that they are not really as useful facing the eastern direction. What we'll be seeing is that the Russians will be likely to capture the remaining parts of the Kursk region within this week. That is, unless some of the Ukrainian forces end up being encircled within Sucha and make a last stand, and that will draw out the battle potentially to last longer than a week. There's also a possibility of a complete Ukrainian withdrawal, giving up their positions and potentially leaving behind several groups of forces, similar to the direction of Avdiivka, and this can cause the Ukrainians to lose their positions within the Kursk region within just the next 48 hours. To the south of Kursk, the Ukrainians have managed to advance further within Shevchenko, negating some of the Russian counterattacks over the past few days. The Ukrainians are here looking to gain full control over Shevchenko, where fighting is taking place over the fortified positions to the east of the town and the school area, as well as the park area here in the western and central parts of the town. The Ukrainians are looking to gain full control of it to then push onwards to cut off the supplies of the Russian forces west of Pokrovsk, with heavy fighting continuing over the town of Shevchenko. With regards to the negotiations between Trump and Zelensky, the Ukrainians are going to meet the Americans in Saudi Arabia this week. And in this Financial Times newspaper has revealed Zelensky is going to offer a partial truce. This has been written about in the media for the past few days, where Zelensky is proposing a truce between the Russians and the Ukrainians, not launching any deep strikes. However, this is, of course, a ridiculous notion. First of all, Trump wants a complete ceasefire, not a partial one, not to mention the fact that the Russians would never agree to such a partial truce. They already said they will not agree to any truce at all, but a partial truce does not make any sense for the Russian side because their deep strike capabilities are much stronger than the Ukrainian side, especially the Ukrainians without US intel will have very limited capacity to launch any sort of deep strike into Russian territory, and this is probably why Zelensky is proposing it, because it is very beneficial for him if such a partial ceasefire enters into effect. At the same time, the Ukrainians will attempt in this one to normalize relations with the US, try to prevent the United States from further deteriorating the relations between them due to the discussion and the fights between Trump and Zelensky, really, that happened in the White House. At the same time, we will likely see that the Ukrainians will be willing to make a lot more concessions this time around compared to the last time, now that Zelensky has realized what sort of person Trump is compared to former President Joe Biden. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon and YouTube membership for additional content. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.